into this. The hearts that spanieled me at heels, to whom I gave their wishes, melt and blossom in Caesar. Let them all fly.
Why is my lord Henry?
I'll strip thee, thy deserving. Follow Caesar's chariot. Let him hoist thee up.
Help me, my women. Help me.
Mother.
Oh, he's mad.
To the Roman boy she's sold me, and I fall under her plot. She dies for it.
He's mad.
To the monument.
To the monument. There, lock yourself. Send him word you're dead.
Antony and Cleopatra came out of my father's love of Shakespeare. I think he, as a stage actor first and a film actor second, always felt that he had roots in the Shakespearean theater. One of his earliest roles was as Proculeius in Antony and Cleopatra, where Catherine Cornell, a famous stage actress, played Cleopatra. And he remembered that as a kind of shining time and an exciting baptism into the world of Shakespeare, and never looked back. He went on to do Macbeth and several other plays on the stage. And to him, Shakespeare was the touchstone for actors who took their craft seriously.
Whither hast thou led me, Egypt?
Oh, my lord, forgive my fearful sails. I little thought you would have followed.
Egypt, thou knewest too well my heart was to thy rudder tied by the strings, and thou shouldst tow me after. Thou knewest. My call might from the bidding of the gods command me.
Oh, my pardon.
Now I must to the young man send humble treaties, dodge and palter in the shifts of lowness. Aye, that with half the bulk of the world played as I pleased, making and marring fortunes. You did know how much you were my conqueror, and that my sword made weak by my affection would obey it in all cause.
Oh, my pardon.
He would always tell young actors if they wanted to be a real actor, they had to do Shakespeare on the stage. Now, doing it on the stage is one thing, doing it on film is another. It can be expensive, and it even in the early 70s when Antony and Cleopatra was made, it's not easy to do what is basically an epic film with battles and ships and pyramids and Cleopatra's palace and Roman armies. For a reasonable budget. So it was very hard to convince the studios or any distributor. And many financiers would shy away from it as well. To do Shakespeare was a risky proposition for them. It was a lifelong dream of my father's to do the most cinematic of Shakespearean plays, Antony and Cleopatra. Through a lengthy series of years of trying to get it financed and adapting the script and working with casting and working with his good friend, producer Peter Snell, who was his confidant and collaborator on that film and many others, he finally managed to put it together with a series of independently financed loans from banks, Spanish, Swiss, American co-production. And his dream came true, and for him it was a lifelong dream to make Antony.
News, my good lord, from Rome.
What news from Rome?
Let Rome in Tiber melt, and the wide arch of the raged empire fall. Here is my space. Kingdoms are clay. Our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. The nobleness of life is to do thus.
For my father, I think Shakespeare was always a living entity. It was a lifestyle. It was something that wasn't restricted to the stage or to older people or to classicists or academicians or dusty old people who wear tweeds. To him, it was a living, breathing entity, and to be a Shakespearean, to be part of that experience and to bring it to children and to average people, to people who wanted an entertaining story. My father had often said that the most important aspect of any filmmaker is to be a good story to tell, to have a good story, to have a burning desire to tell it, and the means to bring it to an audience, to keep it fresh, to keep it exciting. So in that sense, I think Antony and Cleopatra was his most personal film. And I think he was lucky that he was at the pinnacle of his career and was able to take that chance and willing to fail at it if need be, and willing to help finance it if need be. It became our first film as Agamemnon Films. He and I went on to form our own production company a few years later. In the early 80s, and we made Motherlode and eventually Treasure Island and several other pictures together. And it was an opportunity for him to kind of stretch his legs as a filmmaker, not just as an actor. He had done Planet of the Apes. He had gone the gamut from the early epics of Cecil B. DeMille and Ben-Hur to the science fiction epics, if you will, like Planet of the Apes. And Omega Man, also some pretty edgy stuff. And then I think he decided he wanted to go back to classics, and this was his time, and he was going to do it. The genesis of Antony for my father came about as an organic process over time where he knew he wanted to do it. Obviously, he wanted to play Mark Antony, one of the great Shakespearean roles, one of the great roles ever. And he had just done Julius Caesar, where he played the same role, Antony, opposite Jason Robards and John Gielgud, and also produced by Peter Snell. And I'm sure that over the months of filming in those wonderful location meetings that you have over a beer at the end of the day, where you say, well, what are we going to do next? I think Dad said, Peter, you've got to let me make Antony now. And I think that the process by which he decided to both direct and write it, as well as star in it, came about partly because he just couldn't bear to let anybody else do it, partly because he was good at it. And Peter knew he would do a good adaptation and knew he would direct it not just as a reverential stage actor, but as a cinematic actor and filmmaker. And so it became his first real job of directing a big budget, well, not a big budget, but a modestly budgeted motion picture. And when he wrote the script, which of course he had to sit down and do that first before he could get anybody to give him any money for it, he realized he wanted to set himself the task of being both true to the original play, not to make up dialogue, not to do silly lines. He didn't want to remake Cleopatra, which after all was a hugely expensive and terrifically spectacular movie, but not terribly successful financially. He had to convince people that he wasn't trying to redo that. And so he went back to the original play and kept as true to it as he possibly could. He cut some things down, he combined some language, but he didn't make up any Shakespeare at any time. And he did it in that sort of dynamic, cinematic fashion that I think actually it was a good choice to use him as a writer because he did a wonderful job. Spain was a filmmaker's playground. It was nirvana for filmmakers in the 60s and 70s. From the spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone to the epics of Samuel Bronston, to two of which my father was in, El Cid and 55 Days at Peking, to numerous other action pictures. Spain had everything a filmmaker could desire. It had a favorable exchange rate. It had wonderful infrastructure. They had props. They had costumes. They had the guys that made El Cid soar. And they made one for my father, probably from the same pattern. in El Cid. When I had gone back there years later to scout locations for one of my own films, I came across a guy who had reverently kept my father's costume in the costume house in Madrid, where they had made the original. And I guess they were saving it in case he returned someday to conquer Spain and perhaps the rest of Europe too. So Spain was wonderful. It had everything. It also had a mystique to it. It had a kind of Hemingway-esque. It inhabited the world of Hemingway as Hemingway inhabited that world. And I think it was very much a man's country. It was a great place to make an action picture. We had the running of the bulls in Pamplona, which I went to after filming, and sort of that was a coming of age moment for me, as it had been for Hemingway. And I think stuntmen enjoyed it because there were lots of horse people there. There were good Spanish cowboys who knew how to do horse falls and knew how to ride horses. And you could count on them. They were men of their word. It was a magic time for filmmakers in Spain. My father built a wonderful team to make Antony and Cleopatra. He knew that a director is only as good as the team he works with. Despite the fact that the director is often called the auteur, it's still a team effort. He may have a vision, and it's his responsibility and his judgment about how to bring that vision to the screen. But beyond that, you work with a group of talented, creative, energetic men and women who you need to rely upon. And I think he knew that having a producer like Peter Snell, who would both watch his back, look after the money, and also look after the deals, take care of the production aspects of the film. He didn't have to worry about that. He trusted Peter. Peter trusted him. We're still great friends. Peter and I have made several films together, Motherlode, Treasure Island, and so on. So Peter was a great choice of collaborator, and I think that's what my dad viewed him as. Our editor was Eric Boyd Perkins, who was a marvelous English editor. He worked on films from Bridge in the River Kwai to James Bond. And he was a classic editor and was willing to do some avant-garde things. He did some interesting superimpositions of close-ups of Antony and Caesar during battle scenes, and so did the same technique in the middle of a rather interesting sort of intercutting of a gladiatorial combat with a dialogue tete-a-tete in this sort of summit meeting between Antony and Caesar, in which they are deciding how to split up the known world. And Eric cut that hard-hitting action really, really well. Of course, Joe Canutt, who was my father's second unit director and great friend, choreographed that fight along with all of the other combats in the film, as well as having directed the action scenes. And that was a wonderful synergy between the action, Shakespeare's marvelous dialogue, an interesting set, a good location, great editing, and of course, great cinematography. We had Rafael Pacheco, who was a wonderful Spanish cinematographer, who did this marvelous look for us. I think it looked like a period movie should look. It looked epic to me. And so I think that was a good team for my dad, and he knew he needed one.
Well, go to. I will.
Our production designer was Morris Pelling, who was a wonderful, creative designer who had a limited budget to work with and had to build things like Cleopatra's Barge, a pyramid, the interior of Cleopatra's Palace in Alexandria, the interior of various buildings in Rome and Greece, as well as all the exteriors, find the costumes and do all of the colors and all of the various creative things that a production designer has to do. And I think he did a magnificent job of it. And again, he was an important part of that team that Dad had assembled around him.
Be quick, scanners.
I kind of had my baptism of fire as a filmmaker on this picture. I was a second assistant on the second unit to director Joe Canutt, who was the second unit director that my father brought in. It was a wonderful experience for me. I was very young. I was about 16. And essentially, we had our own unit. Dad trusted Joe, who was, after all, a son of legendary Yakima Canutt, who did the chariot race in Ben-Hur, and Joe had been my father's stuntman for years and years. And we were all good friends. Joe taught me to ride, taught me to shoot, taught me a lot about film, too. And Joe had somehow organically become this marvelous second unit director. He knew how to direct action. He knew what pieces, what specific shots you needed to get to tell an action story on film. And he had it all written down on a little piece of paper every day. He'd pull it out of his shirt pocket. And he was meticulous. He'd keep a note page for every day. And when Dad sort of turned me over to him, I did have some things I could contribute, because after all, I was my father's son and I knew roughly what his vision was. And I spoke Spanish, so I was able to work with the Spanish extras, stuntmen, horseback riders, and grooms, and all the various crew who were on the set, almost all of whom spoke only Spanish. So I was useful in that context, and I was enthusiastic. I loved the idea. I've never had so much fun in my life. One of my first assignments, we had these tremendous battle scenes where we had hundreds of horsemen and extras, and they were all carrying swords and shields and spears and helmets. And Joe said, listen, I want you to go around behind this phalanx of horses here. And if they're standing still in the middle of the battle scene, get yourself a basket of rocks and chuck the rocks at them to get them moving. Just stir the horses up a little bit. But he said, get yourself a spear too, because some of these Spanish guys don't take too kindly to having rocks thrown at them. So I went around with a spear and a bag of rocks, and I'd throw rocks during the action scenes to get the motion going. Casting was key to this picture, as it is with any picture. And Dad knew that the first thing you have to do if you're doing Antony and Cleopatra is have a great Cleopatra. He decided he didn't want an internationally renowned movie star from Hollywood. He wanted a Shakespearean. His promise to himself, to his fellow filmmakers, and to his audience was that he would bring a cast of real Shakespearean actors. And he did a number of screen tests. He did interviews. He did tests in London, tests in New York, Los Angeles, and they found Hildegard Neal.
Oh, charming. Where think you he is now? Stands he or sits he? Or does he walk? Or is he on his horse?
Who, in my father's eye, was the perfect Cleopatra. She was an accomplished stage actress. She was a Shakespearean. She had done television. She'd done film in England, originally from South Africa. She was drop-dead gorgeous. She had a lot of presence. She could command that language, that Shakespearean language.
Couldst thou speak, that I might hear thee call great Caesar ass unpolicied? O eastern star, peace, peace. Dost thou not see my baby at my breast? Break. Ah, break. That sucks the nerves asleep.
It doesn't matter if you look like Helen of Troy. If you can't do the dialogue, it's not going to work. And I think Hildegard pulled that off. And so that Hildegard was his cornerstone there. And it was a risk because she was not that well known in Hollywood. And did it affect distribution and foreign sales? Maybe, but he didn't care. He wanted good actors. His theory is if you make a good movie and you have good actors and a good story, people will come to see it. And as I said before, he made this film first for himself and his audience. And after that, he worried about commercial elements. The other casting in the film followed the same line. He wanted seasoned stagehands. He wanted people who had trod the boards, who were comfortable with the language of Shakespeare, and were comfortable wearing armor and swinging heavy swords and riding horses. And consequently, he cast people like Julian Glover as Proculeius. But Julian had a second job. he had to play Antony during rehearsals. Dad would stand behind the camera during rehearsals, and he would give himself perhaps a run-through or two. Then he would step behind the camera and let Julian play the role of Antony, which he had to learn as well.
The Lady Fulvia, your wife, is dead.
So that Dad could set up the shots. In that way, I think he was able to both direct and act at the same time, which wasn't necessarily an easy job when you're doing Shakespeare.
What power is in Agrippa, if I would say Agrippa be it so, to make this good?
The power of Caesar.
John Castle was our Caesar Octavius, a wonderful young Caesar, deadly, dangerous, cold, calculating, ruthless.
Caesar, for having Pompey slain in Sicily, we had not given him his share. Then does he say he lent me shipping unrestored. Lastly, he frets that Lepidus should be deposed.
But not without some sense of compassion in the end of the film when he realizes that Antony is dead and the soothsayer has told him so. He can hardly believe it. He says it's so great an event would cause the world to crack in some way.
Antony is dead.
The breaking of so great a thing would make a greater crack. The round world would have shook lions into civil streets and citizens to their dens.
He is dead, Caesar. By that same hand that writ his honor in the acts it did. This is his sword.
That it would shake the world. It couldn't happen without there being some secondary effects like an earthquake for Antony to die and Cleopatra to die. So he was an excellent choice. Other Shakespeareans like Jane Lapater, Doug Wilmer, who was in El Cid with my father, and was marvelous as Agrippa. He had this sort of presence, this kind of eminence, strength, and this kind of Roman character.
Our world. You have a pair of wolves, no more. And throw between them all the food you have. The one will tear the other.
It's always been the fashion to cast English actors as Romans. In Ben-Hur, of course, most of the actors who played Jews were Americans, and the Romans were played by Englishmen, and people like Jack Hawkins and things like that with those great, rich stage voices. So in that sense, I think it was a wonderful choice for Antony as well. There are a number of interesting opportunities for both spectacle and intimacy, and that I think is the nature of Shakespeare, especially if you bring it to the screen, because you can have at one moment a sea battle with ships aflame and hundreds of men in armor fighting and Egyptians sailing across the ocean and Romans clashing and all this marvelous stuff going on. But at the same time, you may cut to the next scene, which could be an intimate scene where Enobarbus says goodbye to Antony, and not Antony doesn't realize that Enobarbus is leaving him. And it's a marvelously quiet, sad, intimate scene, very poignant.
He will not fight with me, old friend. Why should he not?
He's 20 men to 1.
Tomorrow, soldier, will fight by land. I'll live, I'll bathe my dying honor, and the blood shall make it live again.
Will you fight well? I'll strike and cry, take all.
Well said. Come, give me your hand.
And then the next thing you know, you're back out there with the armies and the pyramids and the horses. There were all kinds of objective challenges and difficulties. They had a wonderful barge for Cleopatra's. They decided it wasn't going to be Cleopatra's barge, which is described, of course, by Enobarbus, the barge she sat on, that wonderful lyrical scene with that line. But instead, they had a smaller sort of the dinghy to Cleopatra's barge, where she and a few of her handmaidens were swimming. And they decided they would do it up like a papyrus boat. And they filmed this in a canal in Madrid with lily pads and papyrus plants all around and made it look like the Nile Delta. But of course, the boat sank as soon as they got it in the water. And that was a disaster, and they had to raise the boat again. We had the challenge on the second unit of we had to film the entire Battle of Actium with one ship and one barge. And we would paint the ship 2 different colors on 2 different sides, and we'd put different shields and, of course, different warriors and different colored armor. And they would all run off of the ship onto the barge, and then to film the rest of the scene, they had to run off the barge onto the ship, but we turned it around, it was the other side. So we made the most with the materials that we had at hand. So we did whatever we had to pull us off, including building a small pyramid in the desert behind El Moria. I don't know how Morris Pelling and my father and Peter Snell pulled that off, and they came up with some clever ideas about how does Cleopatra bring Antony into the pyramid. It's not explained in the play, and yet she's able to keep Caesar out for a while. So there's a very clever scene where they developed a door that was up high, and Cleopatra pulls Antony up when her scarf falls, and he grabs onto it with his bloodied hands. And she pulls him in and says, "Help me, my women." And then, of course, you have the stage is set for the marvelous death scene. And then later on, Caesar's got to find a way to get into the pyramid in the secret chamber. And Julian Glover played this scene where he and my dad worked out a system of using Roman shields, where at a signal they would put their shields like a stairway and create a ladder for Julian, who played Archelaus, to run up and try to capture Cleopatra alive for Caesar. When you think of epic film scores, you think of scores like El Cid by Miklos Rozsa, Ben-Hur by Miklos Rozsa, 10 Commandments by Elmer Bernstein. You should think of Antony and Cleopatra by John Scott. John Scott did a wonderful score for us in Antony. And Dad thought at the time that he was the perfect choice because he wrote what I think is a classical romantic symphonic film score. But at the same time, it was modern. It wasn't the sappy kind of film score that you easily could have done. It was traditional in the sense of being grand, of being romantic, of being tragic even. Also being big. There's some big moments in it, as big as the Roman army and the Egyptian navy. But John just did, I think, a magnificent job for my dad and for the film, and he's to be commended.
This miserable change now at my end, lament no sorrow at, but please your thoughts with those my former fortunes, wherein I lived the greatest prince in the world, the noblest, and do now not basely die, not cowardly put off my helmet to my countrymen. No one but Antony did conquer Antony.
men or die. Hast thou no care of me? Shall I abide in this dull world, which in thy absence is no better than a star? See, my women, the crown of the earth doth melt. My lord!
I think that Antony for my father was not only a personal artistic triumph, but it was an achievement that he had spent his whole life trying to accomplish. And for a man and an artist to be able to achieve that at any stage in life, for my father was especially poignant and especially satisfying. It was in the field of drama that he loved the best, in Shakespeare. And at the time he was at the pinnacle of his career, he probably could have gone on and done another Planet of the Apes, or indeed he went on to do things like Earthquake and big budget pictures, science fiction epics, what you will. But I think to return to his roots, to be able to do Shakespeare, that was a dream come true for him.